I'm Gary Nickerson.
And I'm Quinn Taggart.
And this is Outside My Window. We're joined by Rick Allwright. Now, Rick is the Executive Director of the Yarmouth and Area Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for joining us again, Rick. We appreciate it. I want you to talk to us about this really groundbreaking program from the Yarmouth and Area Chamber of Commerce, started a couple of years ago. It's a mouthful, the Yarmouth Region Medical Professional Recruitment Partnership. It's all about this Community Navigator position.
It is a mouthful, but it's a very important project for the Chamber. So a couple of years ago, we ended up identifying that we were in critical need of physicians in the area. It was always talked about that we had a doctor shortage, but it really came to a head with a shortage in anesthesiologists. And we decided that we needed to find out more. We needed to take some action and learn as much as possible. So we talked with numerous doctors from the area to really understand what the issue was and how we might be able to help. And it really came down to, we didn't really have anyone local dedicated to attracting or assisting new doctors and working to recruit or keep them in the area for the long term. So we decided that it was time that we had that person. So we went to work putting together this project and finding partners to be able to get it off the ground.
Do you think, Rick, that the centralization of the health boards put us at a disadvantage being in a rural community in efforts like this?
I think it did. It was before the centralization, we did have someone that was doing this work, maybe not in the same realm and wasn't certainly structured the same way, but it did have an impact. We did end up losing the person who was doing that, and we definitely saw a decline in our retention. So I would say certainly it did, but it is what it is, and we're working towards correcting that problem.
So, obviously good on you as the chamber to take this on, but, if I can be blunt for a second, really, it's not your role. I mean, shouldn't that be the role of the government to make sure that the communities have the resources that they need?
Well, I think it's kind of twofold. Yes, there is a role that government, we believe, is somewhat neglecting, but they've also identified that they did neglect that part of it a little bit. So at the same time, there is a need for local representation and flexibility to be able to do this kind of job, and that actually isn't available within government. Housing this kind of project within the Chamber of Commerce or another organization outside of government provides significant more flexibility in how we go about doing our work, and actually leads to, we believe, a much better outcome and responsibility metrics that we can count on.
Rick, can you talk about the connection there and the relativity between the number of doctors in the community, particularly family practice physicians, and the economy? How do those two relate?
Well, so one of the reasons we took this on is that we see a direct correlation between being able to attract new people or new citizens and therefore businesses and having family physicians and available. It's one of the key things that people are looking for when they're moving to a place is that, can I get the medical care that I need or expect to need in the future? So we see it as a core fundamental part of economic development. So it's one of we see it as something that is critical to business, and if business can't find the employees that they need, because of medical care, then it needs to be fixed, and it's something that we can obviously help alleviate.
So it's mentioned that this program is a quote unquote partnership. So who are the other partners?
So the province of Nova Scotia is involved. We have 4 municipalities in our area involved. From so the municipality of Yarmouth, municipality of Argyle, the municipality of Barrington, and the town of Yarmouth. And then one of our biggest partners is the Yarmouth Hospital Foundation. And then we have a few corporate partners like Canadian Tire, who's come on board as a key partner as well.
Excellent, excellent. So what do you see for the future of this particular program?
Well, we are coming up to our we're in our 3rd year of a 3-year project or pilot project. So we are now looking forward to where we go from here and how to extend the project longer, because we're seeing this success, but we also know that this can't end. This is a long-term project, and just like when it stopped happening, when the amalgamation happened, we can't see it stop happening again. It needs to continue in some way. So we're working towards securing long-term funding for the project to continue. And honestly, I see this model being used throughout the province, and to basically in all communities, and also extending this sort of model to assist anyone move to a new community. Having this key resource in place that knows the community and how to connect everyone in that community is really important, and goes a long ways towards securing people and making sure that they feel they have all the resources they need in order to call this place home.
Our guest is Rebecca Cassidy Rose. Now, she's the Community Navigator. Now, Rebecca began in this position September 2019 after the Yarmouth Chamber of Commerce determined that a lack of family practice physicians was negatively impacting economic growth and development in the area, not to mention community health. With her background in education, work experience, and volunteer involvement, she's been well positioned to succeed. You've got a big role there. First of all, Rebecca, and welcome to the program, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
What does a community navigator do?
Pretty much everything. There are a lot of tasks that fit under the category of other duties as required. It could be helping people get information on the school system. It could be helping people find housing. It could be connecting people with potential employers, connecting people with members of the community who have similar interests and hobbies. It's all about basically the community onboarding aspect of new members of the community, specifically the medical community, and kind of making sure that we present the community as it is, with all of its strengths and some of its weaknesses. Because if somebody's considering coming here, we want to make sure that they make an informed choice, that it's a good fit between the newcomer and the community. And so that's what I do. I let people know everything they need to know about the community, take them on tours, create virtual media tools so that they can see aspects of the community, hospital tours, virtual housing tours, whatever needs to happen to give somebody enough information that they need to make an informed choice about coming here.
Is the program modeled on like a national program or international program, or is it something that's homegrown?
I kind of wish it was, because then I would have had something to go on. But actually, it's a new concept across the province. When I started, I was the 3rd community navigator in the province, and now there are, I believe, 10 of us. So Many of the communities have realized that the best way to represent themselves is by themselves. And so, in an effort to do that, this is the kind of position that a number of communities are using.
So, at the last election, one of the promises from the reigning conservatives was, "Oh, we'll just go out and we're going to hire 1,000 doctors. That should solve the problem." Pardon the sarcasm; it's totally intended. But that's just unrealistic, isn't it?
Yes and no. Yes and no. It's always great to have an assertive or an aggressive goal in mind. The reality is that the health profession needs more than just physicians. It needs more than just family medicine physicians, even. It needs nurses and RNs, LPNs, CCAs. It needs medical lab techs. It needs diagnostic imaging professionals. Like, it needs to be fully stocked to be able to support a physician in the care of their patients. So at one point I had someone ask me, well, we don't really want you recruiting specialists. We just want you recruiting family medicine doctors. But the reality is, without the specialists in place, without the strong support network of other medical professionals, the family physician is limited in their ability to care for their patients. So yes, the new government's promise of hiring just a blanket full of physicians, I think actually what I'm seeing is that it is translating into a number of recruiting initiatives at a number of different levels in the healthcare system. And if that's what it takes, then that's what it's going to take.
Rebecca, every community, as you know, is looking for the physicians, particularly family practice physicians, which is what you are focusing on. Have you had to develop or look to new kind of innovative ways to, connect with potential physicians?
We have had to kind of change our strategy, I guess you might say, but it's not even really changing a strategy, because as a community, we didn't really have one for a number of years. So technically, also, we're not supposed to be using the word recruitment. We're supposed to be using the word attraction. But it kind of all meshes into the same approach. So, for example, before COVID, when we had a site visit, so a site visit is what happens when a physician comes to the area to see the community, to meet fellow potential physicians, to tour the facility and kind of get a good feel for what goes on down here as a regional health center. So before COVID, we were able to have those visits in person, and kind of develop a rapport with a physician, kind of start to establish communication patterns and maybe a trusting relationship. But with COVID, everything is virtual, and it is extremely difficult to set up a trusting relationship with somebody virtually or online, when that person is maybe thousands of kilometers away. So to get around that, in-person video calls like Zoom are very helpful because we get to do a face-to-face. I have a number of videos that have been produced for this purpose, little snippets of the community, different department interviews at the hospital, different aspects, so that they can kind of click on and see up-to-date current visuals on the community as well. So these are different strategies that we didn't need before COVID, that have helped us kind of step up our game, as well as things like attending conferences virtually, which is extremely awkward. It's much easier to be there in person and, shake people's hands and smile and have a conversation and kind of get a sense for the person. So it's kind of like a different sense, a different sort of communication style that you do when you're trying to connect with someone virtually.
How are we doing against some of the more urban centers when it comes to attractions?
Well, we have what I feel, many of us feel that being in rural Nova Scotia is a disadvantage. Many people feel that the extra different distance between, say, Central Zone and our regional hospital is a little bit far to navigate. And it's not just a matter of everybody wanting to be near an airport. Lots of times with physicians, depending on their partner's employment opportunities, those might be more available in a more urban setting. But also, physicians need to keep up their skills and do their own additional continuing training, continuing education. And oftentimes, they have to travel for those types of things as well. So, we do have a number of challenges that maybe an area closer to Halifax wouldn't necessarily have to deal with. But one of the great advantages to not being in that kind of densely organized urban setting is that we have historically and, fairly low numbers in terms of COVID. People don't tend to travel through our community. If they're coming here, they're coming here. Um, so, so that's an advantage, I feel. The other thing is being being at the end of, or the beginning, I should say, being at the beginning of the highway system. We tend to stay here, and so we build a much stronger sense of community and a much stronger sense of belonging and kind of anchor in. We kind of root in a little bit differently than communities that that are closer to the city because we have to, and we've gotten accustomed to that. And so that strong community connection that we have here is a stronger selling point that I think people tend to underestimate. So, we have our unique challenges, but I think they can all be mediated. And that's part of why getting the right fit, the right physician, the right physician's family, the right fit between community and newcomer is so important.
Because you're hiring a family, you're not just hiring a doctor. You're hiring really an entire family into the role, aren't you?
Yes, and actually, Dr. Kevin Orrell, who is the new lead of the Office of Health Professionals Recruitment, I'm about to quote him during some meetings that we had a couple of weeks ago. And, one of the phrases that kept going around was, you hire the physician, but you onboard, you navigate, you attract the family, really. Um, and that's true. If anyone has been in a situation where one person is happy in a community or an occupation, but the rest of the unit isn't happy, then that's a problem. So absolutely, we may hire the physician, but we need to onboard and navigate for the entire family.
I think, when you look at bringing folks in from outside, not only the area, but maybe even outside of Canada, what's what's the word I'm for? The logistics of bringing in a foreign doctor now? Is it still quite bureaucratically intensive?
There's a lot. There's a lot to it. And to be honest, when we had quarantine management plans that we had to do for physicians as well, that was a whole new strategy that we had to come up with on the fly that was never part of the situation before. Um, there are some policies in place and some new procedures that are supposed to ease that. Not the quarantine management plans, but like the immigration pathways. Because the reality is, if you are looking at moving your family and changing your employment and releasing your client base, your patient load that you're connected to. I mean, many people in healthcare, they're in it for the people, and so leaving their client base, their patient base, is difficult. So if you're already doing all of those things, my job is to make it as easy for you as possible, to guide you through whatever we can, and kind of simplify those pathways. There definitely is recognition in terms of immigration and some other agencies that it has traditionally been quite difficult and cumbersome, and there are moves to simplify it.
Do you and the other navigators share? And in other words, like if they had a candidate that might not be a fit for their community, but they thought maybe it might be a fit for ours, that they would just kind of, share the details along and have you, run with it?
Yes, yes, and no. And so I'm gonna clarify that. We have there a distinct role separate from Nova Scotia Health. So Nova Scotia Health has recruiting consultants, and they are the ones that take care of the job openings, the postings, the logistics of licensing. So they are the ones that make sure the physician is able to be licensed in the province, as an example. And then the community onboarding is what the navigators tend to do. And absolutely, we share not specifically confidential, like personal information, but we'll certainly, if I have somebody that really loves to, um, let me see, something. Maybe I have a family that I know of, and they really like to downhill ski. Well, living in Yarmouth may not be the best place for them. So I'm going to give them the information for the other navigators for those areas, maybe near Wentworth and Martok, so that they can reach out to that navigator. So in that way, we protect each person's individual privacy, but we certainly share with our navigators. What we actually do, which is, I think, maybe more valuable, is that we share information about how we're doing this job, how we're defining this job, how we are working with some of the obstacles that we come across. And we are not protective in that we don't want to share our ideas, because we all agree that having a great hire, a great family join us either at a regional level or in a community level, it strengthens us provincially as well. And raising the profile of Nova Scotia as a province raises our profile nationally as well. And the reality is that there is a shortage of family medicine physicians across the world. Like, it's an international lack of supply. A lot of new physicians just aren't as interested in doing family practice. So our Navigator Working Group really does share an awful lot.
A couple of things, Rebecca, I'd like you to talk about. They're both housing related. First of all, that wonderful doctor's residence on Vancouver Street. If you could, sort of speak to that, expand on that. Who are you, when you're out navigating, who are you looking to sort of draw into that? And then on a larger scale, the whole housing issue. Obviously a physician with a family is looking for a larger house. We've had an extremely hot housing market here in Western Nova Scotia. So can you kind of wrap all that up in a package for us?
I'll try. That's a lot of stuff in that one question. So starting with the house on Vancouver Street, we call that Credit Union Place. And so that was a wonderful initiative put forward by Coastal Financial to help us with the housing for medical learners. So a lot of people will ask me, how does that relate to recruiting? Like, how is that going to help me get a doctor? So we have a medical residency program here through Dalhousie, we have 5 new family medicine residents each year, and at any one time, we have 10 family medicine residents and 2 internal medicine residents at any one time. So to have those resident seats or to have those individuals in those positions as resident doctors, they have to apply to come to Yarmouth. Yarmouth has to agree that, that individual has the that it's a good fit between the residency program and the physician. But to be able to make sure we have enough people that are really interested in coming here to do their residency when they are in medical school, we want them to come here and do some of their rotations. So just to clarify that, medical school is 4 years. And during those 4 years, the medical students will go to various hospitals and do 1 or 2 or 3 week placements to give them experience in a specific type of medicine or a specific department. If a medical student is already paying for an apartment, parking, and the normal housing expenses being in the city near the university where they have to attend school, then it makes sense that they would want to do rotations where they can sleep in their own apartment at night because it's cheaper. So if you follow that line of reasoning through, them coming to Yarmouth is a bit of an economic disadvantage because they have to pay for accommodations while they are here. And so the purpose of supporting medical learners in terms of housing is a way that we created to level the playing field. So we are able to rent the students space, clean, new, convenient, extremely affordable housing while they're on rotation here, so that coming here is no longer an economic disadvantage for their education. Many students that come for their rotations here have never been to this end of the province. So how can they possibly choose to do their residency here if they've never been here? So that's how having a wonderful accommodation option for them to do their rotations here can potentially translate into resident doctors being here. And then we have them for 2 years where they may connect with the community in a number of different layers. And then at graduation, they may decide, you know what, this was a great community for 2 years. I want to stay here. And so that is how Credit Union Place allows us to impact recruiting in a long-term time span. Now, having said that, Credit Union Place actually has 3 types of housing for medical learners. So we have a student suite that has independent ensuite bedroom, bathroom, privacy locks, with a shared kitchen living room. So we can have 3 students here on medical rotation at any one time, and they all have their own personal secure space. We also have a 1-bedroom locum apartment. Now, a locum is a physician that comes from away to help give respite or help provide extra staffing for some chronically understaffed departments. So we have 1 unit specifically for locum physicians. And then we have 3 2-bedroom apartments that are available for the resident doctors that are here for 2 years. They're available for them to stay at should they choose. Now, our first priority is physicians, but for example, if we have a space in our student unit and there is a student, a medical professional student in a different department that also needs housing, then we have the opportunity to support them as well. So we could be offering support to an occupational therapy student, respiratory therapy student, um, you name it, whoever needs it, because we need all sorts of different professionals, and they all need to have learning experiences, and we all want them to be able to come down and experience Yarmouth. So that's the information on Credit Union Place. Now, the second part of your question had to do with housing for physicians and families that may be moving here from other provinces, other parts of our own province, or even other countries. And the biggest challenge there, A, is supply, but B, managing expectations. Because a number of physicians that might be coming from, say, a newer suburb outside a big city, they are used to, as an example, new construction that's very space efficient. And as we all know, this is an older community. We have a lot of beautiful historic properties, and those are just not the kind of property that they have any experience with. And so that is a bit of a hiccup from time to time.
So when it comes to Credit Union Place, we'll double back to that for a second, Rebecca,
Sure.
if you don't mind. The credit union, of course, was one of the major contributors to seeing that project through, but you had a lot of other help with that. So here's an opportunity to give a shout out to all those people.
Oh my goodness, we did have a lot of help, and absolutely, Coastal Financial was the driving force that helped us with that. Um, we came across a couple obstacles along the way, and they could have dropped it and said, you know what, this is more than we anticipated. But they didn't. They stayed true to their focus and to their dedication to the community, and really pulled it together. And I can't thank them enough. But in addition to that, we had great um, support from the community in terms of a variety of the trades. Everybody was able to come together and make that project get built in a very timely fashion. We had a number of community companies, small companies, large companies, that either gave us a discount or maybe they provided their services without billing for all of their labor. There were so many. Oftentimes we've had shout outs on the Credit Union Place Facebook page. I know we're still putting all of that together, but I think that we're going to be having a pretty comprehensive list go out just to thank the entire community really for supporting us in this in that initiative.
Now, you decided in the end to level the old place that was there and construct new. Why did that come about that way? Was it just going to be too much to renovate, or just it wasn't suitable to renovate?
Well, there were a few things that happened. First of all, the location was perfect, which is part of the reason why the older building was chosen to begin with. But once we really started, and I use a royal we because this was not on my plate, but once the building started to kind of really be evaluated in terms of its ability to withstand the level of renovation that we needed to have done, it just was not going to be an option. It would have cost Coastal, I should say, let me be very clear. Coastal Financial bought it, they signed the check. It would have cost probably $200,000 more to fully renovate the older structure, and we still wouldn't have had nearly as efficient heating systems, security systems. It just wasn't going to satisfy the needs of the students or the medical learners, and thereby also the needs of the community, because this is all for the well-being of the medical and the community at large. And our utility bill for the older structure would have been more than we would really be able to afford as our project continues. And so that would have meant that we wouldn't be able to offer accommodations for the pricing that we are. So in no way did it make sense to keep that building. There was there were some structural deficits that would have been difficult to work around, to say the least.
I'm sure COVID has made your job much more challenging. In as much as you can't get out to, like you used to, the career fairs or the professional job fairs, if I can use that terminology. So it's obviously had to be more online, on the phone. So what difficulties and what challenges and how have you sort of had to fine tune things since the last 20 months or so?
I would say the most fine tuning has happened in two specific areas. So the first one is that is timeliness. If people shoot out a question, they're so accustomed to having information right at the tip of their fingers pretty much whenever they want it. We need to be very responsive. So there's no hesitation there really. Especially when you're dealing with people that could be half a world away. My need to respond quickly to any kind of inquiries or conversations that are going on is really important. But the other obstacle, which is bigger than anything else, I think, has to do with internet fraud. Believe it or not, it is very difficult to communicate with someone who is half a world away that what I'm showing them on my phone, what I'm telling them about my community, the videos that I'm showing, it's very easy to duplicate those and to have a fraudulent presentation, or you hear about internet scams where someone has bought a house but the house doesn't actually exist, or if it does exist, it doesn't exist where they thought it existed. So trust, building trust with people who can't meet you, who can't look you in the eye, who can't shake your hand, that I think is the biggest obstacle. And it takes a long time to develop that kind of rapport with someone. It's not uncommon when I'm first getting to know somebody to actually do a FaceTime video, to walk down the street, to show them the buildings that they're going to see in some of the videos, to show them that a house that I'm giving them real estate information on actually exists. These are the kind of things that we have to do, and we can't take offense at it. It's just there's a lot of fraud out there, and that's not really who we are, and we need to make sure that we communicate as honestly and as effectively and build that relationship. That's key.
It's a shame that with all the other challenges that we're faced with, that you've got to deal with something like that. It's just,
I know.
wow. I mean,
Yeah.
you would expect that for things like, financial institutions. You get the spams and the scams and the phishing emails all the time, but for something like this, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's just not an angle that I would have thought would have cropped up. I've heard about like
Well,
the rental scams and people taking deposits for apartments they don't own and stuff like that. I hear about those, but something like this, I guess it sort of makes sense. You're really just stuck with trying to figure out a way to make somebody believe what you're telling them.
I think we are quite protected here in Canada, especially in Nova Scotia. There are scams all the time, but the level of corruption is so much lower here in comparison with where some physicians are coming from. We are really it's really made me appreciate what we have and who we are. And the great thing, though, because there always has to be a silver lining. The great thing is that by the time that relationship is kind of forged, and we have that trust and that open communication, I have been privy to some fantastic people and families, and I just feel so honored to be able to represent our community and to also represent the newcomers and to find the best way to mesh. I've met wonderful people, and it's an honor to be able to serve my community that way, really.
And we've got some great support groups for newcomers in the community as well, don't we?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are a lot of, I think we're going to see a fair bit of changing in terms of immigration support and newcomer support. But what is really important is the way the community responds to newcomers. So oftentimes, people will say, "Oh, everybody here is so friendly," which is true. But there's a difference between being friendly and being welcoming. Once you have your own peer group of friends set and you may have extensive family in an area, sometimes we forget that we need to find ways to let other people in and to include them. And that's kind of the difference between being a friendly community and being a welcoming community. And it's those small, welcoming moments where different parts of a community reach out to someone that are really better in many ways than any organization.
And you've got a perspective on that as well. I mean, you came in from away into Yarmouth and were welcomed in. And I mean, I realize that was a few years back. I won't say how many, but that'll date both of us, actually, Rebecca, so that's not good.
Yeah.
But, does that give you a good perspective? Does that help?
I like to think it does. So I was born in Ontario, brought up in PEI until we moved here kind of just before junior high, I should say. Went away for university, went back to Ontario for a little bit, and inevitably came back. I think you need to go to really appreciate coming back. Not everybody does, but I certainly needed to. And so having been away and chosen to come back does give me a better appreciation for becoming part of the community again, for comparing it with other communities, and for having an idea of what other people may experience in other communities, so that I can say, you know what, this is a little cultural idiosyncrasy of our area, or I understand your terminology, because that's how something might get referred to in another area. It also means that I'm very mindful of trying to make sure everybody is on the same page. So, for example, if I have somebody come in from, say, out of country, and they're going to rent an apartment, it's important to me that I sit down with the landlord and the renter, and I go through the Nova Scotia Rent and Tenancies Act with them, because if everybody is on the same page, it prevents a lot of issues later on. So I get to ask all the uncomfortable questions, like what happens if the check is returned? What happens if I've asked my landlord 3 times to come in and fix the plumbing and they haven't done that? Or how do I make sure that I can't even think of another issue, but I like to start off with those relationships being as clear as possible, to prevent any kind of ill feelings later on. And I think I have a better perspective of that having been away and then come back.
Setting expectations is extremely important.
Absolutely. Number one.
So, what's on your Community Navigator plate for 2022?
Well, it's going to be exciting. Now that Credit Union Place is up and running, we are redirecting some of our attention to new advertising um, platforms, new virtual conferences that we haven't been to. Now that people are getting more experienced with virtual conferences, they tend to run a little bit better and a little bit easier. So we're going to be branching out to try and entice people or try to expose different medical professionals, especially ones that are in rural areas, um, to kind of consider Nova Scotia. Um, so that's kind of a great redirection. You might want to call it more of a traditional recruiting, but that's kind of now that we have different resources in place that we've built over the past couple of years to be able to to community onboard them well. Now we have more of an availability to go out and expose the community and expose other physicians to our part of Nova Scotia. So that's definitely number one. We have a new graduating class this July of family medicine residents, and I don't want to share any numbers, but there are some people who are very interested and are having discussions about staying on here. So that is exciting, and we're also able to now kind of redirect a little bit and start looking at supporting or encouraging local high school students, for an example, to think about medical school. So those are a few balls that we kind of have up in the air. I'm pretty excited. I don't necessarily agree or align myself with any political party particularly, but I will say this: I have some optimism, and I'm encouraged by some of the changes that I've seen in the new government in terms of their approach to recruitment, and particularly in terms of their inclusiveness of navigators across the province and kind of what we're doing. And they see us as facilitating and enhancing the governmental recruitment process. And that is just good for everybody. So those are a few things we kind of have on our plate.
Do you see the community navigator position as one of those ones where at the end of the line, you end up working yourself out of a job? I don't really want to phrase it that way, but I mean, at some point, would you like to see it just so balanced that it's not necessary? Or do you see it being something that's going to be ongoing?
Well, I would love to see that, but I don't think it will happen during my working life. Um, so basically, not only do we have to kind of get caught up to where we are fully staffed, for lack of a better term, but we also have to keep in mind a couple key developments. So one would be upcoming retirements. Um, Sometimes physicians may not feel like retiring if they feel like they may be abandoning their patients. I can't imagine that that would be a great feeling at all. So not only do we need to get caught up, but we also have to plan um, for succession planning. So that is one aspect. The other aspect is that medical grads, new medical grads, don't want to practice the way physicians did when they were graduating 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago. They like to have a lot of variety within their practice. So they want to spend, I'm just going to throw this out there. Maybe they want to spend a day a week in the emergency department, and maybe they want to spend 2 days a week in the prenatal clinic, and maybe they want to spend 2 days a week with their own patient clinic. So I have a feeling that this job will continue to be necessary because physicians and how they practice and where they want to practice and what they want to practice is going to be a moving target. And everybody wants to be able to have a successful, fulfilling career, and people want to have some work-life balance. And I know that's all the buzzword, but really we need to be able to stay on top of what new graduating physicians are looking for in terms of practice, and adapt on the fly and prepare for that as well. So I would love to think I could work myself out of a job, but I think we've got a little ways to go yet.
You know, one must think that other communities in Nova Scotia, even across Canada, must feel a bit envious about the development of physician recruitment in Yarmouth. I mean, it's really been put on the front burner, as you know, Rebecca, for a number of years, you know, initially by the councils, and then the chamber really took it on. We saw the creation of your position just over 2 years ago, the building of that, constructing of that beautiful building on Vancouver Street. Do you ever hear from people in other communities kind of wanting to pick your brain, see what your secrets are?
Absolutely. It absolutely happens. That's part of the thing that happens within our Navigator working group. We call it, we just call it a working group. It's just an ad hoc group. We've all kind of come together to support each other. We meet once a month and kind of share ideas. And there are newer communities who may have had their Navigator for a couple of months. And so they're reaching out to us who have been in the position for longer to say, okay, how do you report? How does your organizing body manage you? Like how is your budget run? These are all questions that we can share to a certain extent and give them some guidance. And we definitely are very visible right now. Our community has taken a very assertive role in terms of physician recruitment and medical professional recruitment. Thus the very long title that Gary had to read out at the beginning. But every model, every community is distinct in their organization of the Community Navigator position in terms of maybe how it's funded, how much it's funded. There are some areas that only have part-time designation, and that would be difficult. This is very much a full-time job. It would be very difficult to do part-time. I think you would always be saying, well, I'd like to do this, but there's no time. For example, our position runs under the umbrella of the Chamber of Commerce, but there are 9 stakeholders in the partnership, which include municipal government, the provincial government, and the Hospital Foundation is a huge supporter. But there are some communities that may have a different composition of the partnership. Maybe their partnership is all business-based, or maybe their partnership is mostly physician-dominant, whereas we have a good blend. I think it's that blend of influences in my oversight committee that have allowed us to create what we need for our community. And in time, I'm optimistic. I think that each community will build the Navigator position into what their community needs.
Rebecca, I was wondering, have you been able to get a sense from the various medical schools that you've been in contact with, as far as the number of medical students looking to get into family practice? Are more looking to get into family practice, or are more looking to get into specialty medicines, whether it's surgery, psychiatry, what have you?
Overall, internationally, physicians tend to be choosing specialties. Part of that is interest, part of that is economics, part of that is, from what I'm hearing from from residents and from other med students. Part of it is also because I think they feel a bit more control over work-life balance in a specialty. But in terms of the number of seats, Dalhousie last year increased the number of seats that were available to rural students in Nova Scotia. And that is going to take 3 or 4 years before we start to see that kind of shift translate into the residents that are graduating from those programs. By far, our best support and our best recruiting pathway, you might say, for family medicine is absolutely Dalhousie. And we have an excellent Dalhousie residency program here led by Dr. Abir Hussain. And so sometimes we have students that come here just because they hear about how fantastic our residency program is here. Other areas that we may get physicians from include University of Sherbrooke in terms of having French students. And some of our specialty students they can come from all across the country, but I see a few more from Memorial in St. John's, Newfoundland.
Rebecca, we can't thank you enough for chatting with us today. It's been very interesting, and keep up the great work. We all appreciate what you're doing for us.
Well, thank you, Gary. I have to say, I really love my job. It is very dynamic. It has so many different aspects to it that there's always a challenge. And as soon as I kind of figure like I've got a hold on something, then something new pops up, and I embrace and enjoy the challenge. And if I get to work myself out of a job, then that would be fantastic as well.
I'm Gary Nickerson.
And I'm Quinn Taggart.
And this has been Outside My Window.